Christians, good evening tonight. This Tuesday evening. I trust that all is well, and I hope that you had a great day in the Lord, as every day I hope would be the experience that you would have. Tonight, we're going to continue in the exposition on the book of Job, and we're going to be starting in verse 13 of the 3rd chapter. And what we know so far is that the devil and God, Satan and God, had an exchange, a dialogue concerning Job. And the dialogue was about whether or not Job was faithful to God genuinely, or if his relationship with God was merely transactional. And Satan was adamant about proving that the only reason that Job was faithful to God was because of all of the material benefits that he had received during his life. And he went so far as to tell God at the divine tribunal, he went so far as to tell him that if God were to take away all of those things that he'd given Job, that Job would certainly, most certainly, curse God to his face. And we found that that was absolutely not the case. It simply wasn't the case. And so we saw what ensued. He had the loss of property. He had the loss of the life of his family. All 10 of his children were lost. He had the loss of his dignity. He had the loss of his health. And he had the loss of the faithful companionship of his wife. And she was pretty much the final blow. And we know that Satan has made a practice of going after the wife of godly men to bring them down. And in this case, it was effective once again. But it didn't thwart the faithfulness of Job. And that is what this is all about. Would his faithfulness be thwarted? Would it be upended? Would it be circumvented? This is what we are talking about. And there are so many things that that Satan would throw at you to trip you up in your faithful pursuit of the Almighty. But what you need to know, that our perseverance in Him has nothing to do with what we are able to do, but it has everything to what He has already done on our behalf. We are His children. We are His children. And Satan and his minions will stop at absolutely nothing to get us to question our Father. He will stop at nothing to do that. And so we find ourselves in Job chapter 2, verse 13. Now, in the first verses of this chapter, Job chapter 3, we find in these verses Job's lament, his crying out, his expression of grief. We see that his trial is weighing heavily upon him, and he has no idea how it happened and why it happened. All he knew is that it was happening. But we need to understand that his lamenting in the first part of chapter 2, his lamenting was not an expression of rebellion against his God. Please do not read these verses and see him or misconstrue him to be of an atheistic deportment, because he was not. He was not. But he was one that can perfectly be stated as one who was mournful in the midst of a grievous agony, a most grievous agony. And here he is, he's wrestling with God's providence. Remember, God told him nothing. He is just simply the victim, as it were, of God's mysterious, providential way. And so, even though his words are clouded and shaded and darkened by sorrow, they still come from Job. They still come from Job from a heart that still acknowledges God's most holy sovereignty, which is where he must rest, which is where he must find refuge, which is where he must find a way in his soul and in his spirit to be composed in such a way that the bounds or the ties that bind him to God only become strengthened. The cords that binds him to the Most High must only be strengthened. And we're going to see that this was progressively the case. But in this passage, in this chapter of Job chapter 3, we see clearly that he has a desire for non-existence. He wishes he had not been born. He describes his life as covered up in darkness. He wishes that the legs that surrounded the womb of his mother had never opened to free him. And he sees his freedom from her womb as the entrance into this dark prison that he is now in. Life. Just simply this life. And this is not a issue about him in terms of human frailty. It's not an issue of his being fragile, nor is it an issue of unbelief. Even in wishing he had never lived, even in Job wishing that he had never lived, he testifies that the life that he has itself remains, and he knows it to be a gift of God. He knows his life is a gift from God, which is why he has no aspirations to take his life, even though he expresses that he wishes he had never been born. This is a very human response of agony. Do you remember our Lord's agony as he approached the cross? Remember what it was like from the Son of God himself, who, as he approached the cross, found himself buried under the weight of agony and sorrow, a grievous pain, a grievous burden. The Son of God had it. How much more shall Job, or we ourselves, have that? This is what he went through. He was under a trial of God. And I believe that Job understood that he was being tried by God. But what he did not know was why. What he didn't know was why. So briefly, I want to go back to an overlap with two of the verses that we went over last night, but not in the detail that I intended. So I'll try to cover them a little bit as I go from verses 13 and 14 and on to the remaining verses of this chapter. And after these first verses, I will go to the panel and to elicit responses from you on your thoughts as to what we're talking about here. In verse 13, Job says, "For now, should I have lain still and been quiet, I should have slept. Then I had been at rest with kings and counselors of the earth, which built desolate places for themselves." Verse 15, "Or with princes that had gold, who filled their houses and silver." Verse 16, "Or as a hidden untimely birth I had not been, as infants which never saw light." Now back in verse 13, "For now should I have lain still and been quiet. I should have slept. Then I had been at rest." So what he is referring to, he is talking about the peace that he expects comes with death. He is saying that if he dies, then and only then will he be at peace and not have to deal with what he is going through right now. He sees death as a state of peaceful rest and repose and comfort, having nothing to do with the trials and the cataclysmic chaos of this life. And keep in mind, the life that he is now experiencing, one in which he is bereft of all things that provided for his comfort that he was accustomed to having. But now he is surrounded by earthly grief. Surrounded by earthly grief. He envies those that have already died. He's speaking about those who have already died with envy. He covets the fact that they have already passed away, and he wishes that he could as well. But he knows it is not something that he can do. This is part of the trial. And this is a mainstay of the welfare, or I should say the warfare of a Christian soul. To go through trial, to feel pain, to be burdened with the weight and of all of these things which distract us and try to steer us away from holiness. And yet, these very things, they build holiness within us. They build holiness within us. He's not wishing to be gone. He's not desiring to be vacated from his earthly tent. But he is longing, he is asking, he is desiring to be in that, in what he perceives as being the repose of death, the quietness of death. There's hardly any way. I was talking to my wife tonight. We were having lunch earlier today. And I was telling her about how I really don't know how to communicate this, because there is so much that must be going through Job's mind, and there's so much that it is affecting him mentally, psychologically, and her being a clinical psychologist, I was asking for her input into this. I won't dare try to enunciate some of the things that she explained. But I will say that she did talk about the passive and active ideations when it comes to the prospect of the loss of your own life, either at your hands or something that you merely contemplate. What Job is going through here is heavy. It is deep. It is dark. It is frustrating. And so many of us go through these things. But this is when we need to allow the great physician of souls to enter in and examine us, and then to perform that surgery that takes place in our hearts that only God can do. Only Christ can do. And he agonizes, Job agonizes in his soul over this trial that he's going through. To him, the sorrows of life make death seem like a gentle sleep, like it's a nap he wants to take forever, where the pain is gone and the soul will cease and put an end to all of the struggles, all of the cataclysmic, catastrophic things that he's going through in his life. Remember, one of the last things that he heard before his friends came was from his wife, who said, "Curse God and die." What an amazing amount of affliction to put on a single soul. What an amazing thing. And yet this is what our elder brother in the Lord was going through. And again, I can't begin to understand the magnitude of what he went through. But I do have a glimpse in terms of the spiritual, faithful heroicism that resulted from it. And God makes it clear to us that Job was a man of an upright heart. And God told us before any of this happened what his character was. Job may have lost all, including his reputation. Job may have lost all when it comes to his reputation. He may have saw his circumstances alter the way others see him. But what we must understand is that what really matters is how the Lord sees us. It is important for us to have our reputation before him upright and perfect. Our reputation before God is that we fear him. Our reputation before God is that we eschew evil. But when God recognizes that you are a person, man or woman or child, of good reputation in his eyes, don't worry about what the world thinks. Even if it is your wife or your husband, you must do what the Lord has called you to do. I don't care what your wife says, what your husband says, what your boyfriend or girlfriend says, what your sibling says. You must do what God, the Lord, has called you to do. And don't try to find alternative excuses to go in a different way because you are afraid of all these people and what they think. Job held fast. He held fast. Even when his wife told him to curse God and die, he held fast to his faith, and his faith and his testimony before God remained solid. So before I get into the verses 15 and forward, I want to give everyone on the panel an opportunity to give their opening remarks. Brother Jeff, man of God, what say you, brother?
Well, what I say is that, I see what you're saying. There's a depth here of feeling. I mean, the desire not to be born is wishing that he was never born so he didn't have to face this. And the desire to die is to escape the grief and stress of what's going on. And I believe he reached his nadir. I mean, he speaks this, but he reaches his nadir when his wife says, curse God and die. And I really believe that his wife was at the same level of depression. That's all we hear from her.
Right.
But this is a projection. I believe she is feeling that for herself, and basically is saying, you need to do this too. And I think what we will find is that he has nadired out in terms of his feelings and everything, because as we see when he speaks to his friends, he goes to, if I could just talk to God, we could straighten all this out. That's a lot different. I mean, if he were still in the depths of depression, he would just, he wouldn't say anything. They would say all that, and he'd probably say, fine, whatever you say. I'm so depressed I can't stand it. But yet he starts to come out of that. So I think we've seen the nadir of Job's depression and reaction.
Right. Absolutely. Sister Meg, what say you? Opening remarks.
I think I just want to start with this one verse, and then I just want to explain something. 1 Corinthians 6:19-20, it says, "You are not your own, for you were bought with a price. Therefore, glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's." So I said that to say, could you imagine, right? Because you tell us to put ourselves in remembrance. Job has lost his wealth. He has lost his servants. He has lost his health. He has lost his children. And he's sitting in ashes, scraping boils off of his skin and crying out to the Lord. But as I read this chapter, we see that it's not sin, right? It's grief at its lowest point. But then I thought about this. Job's mind was not faithfulness, but it was his mind crying out to the Lord. He was completely emptied of all of his human understanding, anything that he could contemplate in his head, probably thinking, why did the righteous suffer? But it was a mind that was ready to hear God at any point when he spoke, because he wanted an answer.
And you think that he didn't have faithfulness?
Oh, absolutely.
You think he did not have? You think he did not have faithfulness?
No, I said he did. I said Job's mind is not faithless; it's wounded.
Oh, okay, I got it. I'm sorry. I misheard.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
And so I at that point, I would be begging to hear the Lord. I don't care whatever you had to say. I want to hear it.
Right.
And this is it reminds me also of John chapter 17, and it's my favorite chapter in the whole Bible. And it took me a long time to get through that chapter without crying. And I feel the same way in this. Like, I couldn't imagine, like you said last night, you're like, we can all think about what it would be like, but we can't. I could not imagine this.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't. I mean, some people fancy they can, but I can. And maybe some can, and I certainly, it's not something I would raise my hand and say, bring it my way. But I would hope that, as all of us would hope that, and we would know that given the situations, and this is what we should understand, that given whatever circumstances that the Lord takes us through, it is He who also equips us to get through it. Always. And this is what the understanding that the Christian should have to have. And so, I had a guy tonight harangue me, a guy who I've never had a conversation about. He writes me on DM, has a lot of things to say, and I have no idea why, but he did. And before it's all over, he called me a false teacher, and I wear that badge of honor proudly, considering who he is. And so, and it was interesting because I was telling my wife about the exchange I was having with this guy. And she reminded me that my brother, my real brother, my blood brother, and my Christian brother in the Lord, my brother David, he called me up yesterday out of the blue, and he says, don't let anybody distract you from what you're doing. He says, what is going on with these things these lives and these talks that we're having, these conversations? He says, don't let anybody distract you, because this is the Lord's work. And he went on and on and on. And he told me this with tears. If you knew my brother, this was not a normal occurrence. And then when I had this guy tonight on TikTok saying what he had to say, and for no reason that I know the reason why he started, but I don't know. We've never had a conversation. And so, and I was ready to sort of engage with this guy. And then my wife reminded me of what my brother said yesterday. So he said it. She brought it to my attention. And so because of the both of them, I was able to regain composure. And it was comforting to hear. And I'm saying this, Christians, to let you understand something. That whatever you're going through, no matter how difficult it is, comfort is there. And God gives it. He always gives comfort to the grieving soul who loves Him. And it's not always that you're going to have it right. We are not all going to be theologically sound on every minute detail of the scriptures. No, we're not. But the Lord knows our heart. And what Job did is show us an example of enduring faithfulness, patience under the rod of God, bearing the weight of affliction and serving Him anyway. And anyone who turns away from the Lord because the trial was too hard, it is because they don't know Him. But we do. And we can never forget that. Because the day of trial is always at the door. And so it may happen, it may not happen. And when it does happen, if it does happen, it may come in a variety and varying degrees. But you must smart under it. Because it is the Lord who seeks to do you good, to bring you closer to Him. And this is what I meant yesterday when I'm talking about how the affliction of God, if you want to know what the measuring tool is to know where you stand with God, it will have everything to do with how you bore up under affliction. Not how you survived success. That is not survival. but it is how you hold up under the pressure of affliction, persecution, tribulation, mocking, all these things. We must do this. Sister Lisa, your thoughts?
Good evening. My first thoughts on this book is this is really difficult to read, and especially this chapter here. It just, to me, it just shows really how depressed, how hurting this man was, and we know it ends up, and the thing I think about too is all through it all, he never cursed God. Never. And he never even questioned himself. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? Right. For instance, I might, with certain comforters saying certain things, I might question and think, well, did I do something to deserve, I would be, or at least I think I would be. We talk about the Holy Spirit providing everything that we need, and I am 100% sure of that. Mm-hmm. I'm just kind of thinking ahead of, it's happened to me before. That's the first thing that we think of. What did I do?
Right.
And he never does that. He even says, if Jeff brought up, if I get a chance to stand before God, I'm sure I can, make my case. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty cool to me. So I'm looking forward to continuing on and seeing what y'all else glean from this and just learning more.
Amen, sister. Thanks for that. Brother Jeffrey, encouraging servant, your thoughts.
Well, good evening, Jonathan, and good evening, panel. It is wonderful to be with you all again. Oh, Jonathan, by the way, who are those 4 handsome devils you've got on a photo on your TikTok panel?
Stop that nonsense. Keep going, brother.
No. You got to tell us who those 4 good-looking guys are. All right. Anyway, one of the things that I've gleaned from what we've studied tonight so far is that in spite of his pain, what he's been afflicted with, what he's lost, what he's dealing with, and everything that happened, I think sometimes, or at least I've been guilty of overlooking the fact, Jonathan, that old Job is just one tough old bird. I mean, he wants to die, but like you said, he's not going to take his life in order to do it. He's going to continue to endure. I'm not so sure how many of us would be ready to put ourselves to the sword, so to speak, in those times, if we were in his position, having lost and having endured what he has. Okay? And so I'm not saying don't anybody go out and harm yourself. No. What I'm saying is Job, we talk about what he endured, but we need to think about too, man, he's tough to continue to endure this. His wife has tempted him, curse God and die. What's wrong with you? He'll do it. Right. It takes guts and courage to continue to do and work through this the way he is. So I think we need to give Job a little bit of credit here, Jonathan, the fact that he's just one tough old guy in spite of what's going on in his life right now.
Right. Absolutely. Sister Candy, your opening remarks. Sister Candy, you there?
Yeah. I just say everything everybody said is true, and I still see the fact that the only way we can possibly fathom to go through what Job's going through and how he's feeling is to have Christ in us.
Right.
He is our strength. Under his wings and his feathers and his hands is where he keeps us. That's where we rest. And without him, we can't imagine what Job's going through. There's no way we can imagine what it is without God in our lives.
Absolutely.
That's my opinion.
Absolutely, sister. Appreciate that. Sister Mariah, your opening remarks.
I just find it fascinating that, he didn't just look like, what happened in this past month or, this past year of what it was that I done. He took it all the way to his birth, and seeing that nature of darkness in contrast to the light, and darkness is never worthy of the light. So I find that very interesting, because most people, like any of us, will be like, well, what happened in the last year or so? Like, I didn't see this coming, or, so I find that perspective pretty interesting. So I'm super excited to go ahead and go forth with the rest of the scriptures here in chapter 3.
Thank you, sister. I appreciate that. And let me tell you something. That you've been on one on this one for sure, Mariah, because this is another good observation. Not just because I didn't catch it, but simply because it is a good observation. And what I mean by that is that you're right. Job was talking about going back to having his life extinguished at birth. So now, up to this point, it's safe to assume that before this tragedy happened, all these things befell him, that he had a pretty, glamorous life in terms of pomp and posture. He had it all. And you're right. He's not reflecting on going back to having to go into where that part was taken away, which is probably, weeks ago or whatever it may have been. He goes back to the beginning. And that's a very insightful perspective. He doesn't say, let me go back to the times when my wealth was great, my power was great, my kids were healthy and alive and having dinners every day, and we were doing these things and all.